some people view Seattle one way. What's the way that you view Seattle?
Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of Seattle filmmakers tend to use their work as a commentary on life in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And I'm very different because I grew up in a very unique situation where my household was a very European culture, Hungarian. And so I was basically raised in Seattle, mm-hmm. but not as a Seattleite.
Oh, okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't have the attachment to a lot of the qualities that a lot of Seattle people have.
Mm-hmm. When I lived in Idaho, Seattle was kind of the closest town, city. Mm-hmm. And I came to Seattle for rock shows, vacations. Mm-hmm. I just kind of fell in love with the city, and it was definitely a high point of Seattle in terms of international visibility. Yeah. It was like grunge era. Yeah. Seattle, like singles and, Mm-hmm. So I just was in love with Seattle, and I wanted to live here, and I tried to apply to film schools here, and there wasn't any master's programs in the Northwest mm-hmm. at that point. And so I applied elsewhere and ended up going to Ohio. And then when I was done with school, I thought, I can move to LA, I could move to New York, I could kind of move to anywhere at this point. And mm-hmm. I decided that, I would give Seattle a shot, see if I give it a year, see if it yielded anything.
So yeah, I guess, the culture, the sort of atmosphere here, those were deciding factors.
Yeah, for sure. I just
the mystery of it.
Yeah, the landscape. I loved the beauty of the city. Okay. I find it really inspirational. And then I always liked the people here and the culture here. And cool. So I moved out here kind of hoping to find what I had sort of a capsule version of in film school, which was this little group of people who felt like-minded and funny and good to be around, who all liked making movies. Okay. And I had to leave that when I left film school, and I was mm-hmm. hoping to find it again. And it took me a few years, but mm-hmm. ultimately I did find it.
Cool.
But there's something about the Northwest it's comforting for us. And the Northwest is where I want to raise my family. Mm-hmm. And we talk about moving to Seattle, but we love it up here in Bellingham area. So we kind of stay up here. We love the quiet. We love to be away from everything. Just the environment up here, the types of people you work with for the most part. Mm-hmm. It's just, I just like it. I feel more comfortable here.
Whereas a lot of other Seattle filmmakers want to comment on how the people in Seattle are and how the society here functions, mm-hmm. my intent is to utilize the beautiful aesthetic of Seattle.
Okay.
As a fresh backdrop for a film setting, because it's so underutilized.
Okay.
Most films are shot, in Canada or in LA or New York, and Seattle is such a beautiful city, mm-hmm. and I just think that for an audience it would be kind of fresh on the eyes to see something different like Seattle on film. For example, I would love to see a Marvel superhero that took place in Seattle. Mm-hmm. It would be really interesting, and you could do a lot with Seattle visually.
Artistically, I guess there's an emphasis on sort of color palette and just a texture and just trying to capture things that to me are what's interesting about any landscape. I love the diversity of Washington because mm-hmm. Eden is set in the Southwest, but we shot it in Washington State.
Yeah, on the east side, right?
Yeah, we shot central Washington, near sort of Ephrata and the Grand Coulee Dam. That's it's
mm-hmm.
north central mm-hmm. Washington, and the fact that you can do that and then also shoot Lucky Them, which is very much sort of cityscape, neon lights of Capitol Hill, and then mm-hmm. also the off hours, which is supposed to be sort of middle of nowhere, industrial, a town that used to be thriving that has kind of died down, and it's very rural. Mm-hmm. All those things were able to be shot within a few hours from here is kind of amazing.
I think the obsession with natural beauty mm-hmm. is something that, everybody thinks about, but in the Northwest, we are constantly pounded with rain and mm-hmm. wind, and everybody's like, oh, you're from Seattle, does it rain all the time? And so there's this element of we're always covered in gray. But when the sun comes out, it's just glorious.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all the characters in that way, when they talk about beauty, when they talk about traveling, when they talk about those things, they're thinking about, those are things that the way they talk and their love for beauty and their desire to go and search it out comes from growing up in this area and knowing what beauty is everywhere around
Mm-hmm.
them.
I've been to many of the big cities in the United States. Go to a lot of film festivals, and so I get a chance to see a lot of the different atmospheres in the United States. And obviously, New York notwithstanding, because that's its own behemoth
Yes, yeah.
of a world.
Own little culture out there.
I would have to say that Seattle is the most beautiful of all of them.
Okay.
And just the way that it's laid out, it's beautifully laid against this hillside, and the symmetry of the buildings in the downtown area, and you've got this beautiful landmark, the Space Needle, and so many cool little quirks. It has a lot of character, which in part is due to Seattle people leaving their mark on the city. It's really that. It's Seattle provides a very interesting character, and so really you're setting, if you're setting your film in Los Angeles or New York, it's so oversaturated in the film market that it fades away into the background. But if you set your film in a place like Seattle, all of a sudden that becomes a character of its own.
Cool. Yeah, it was interesting watching because this is one of the first movies that takes place around Seattle that doesn't have the Space Needle. Like, every Seattle movie seems to have the Space Needle.
I know, it's so funny because most of the people who I know who make movies who are from Seattle specifically avoid the Space Needle.
Yeah.
It's only people who come in from out of town who try to get the Space Needle and try to get Mount Rainier and the sound and all these things. It's like, people sort of avoid it, I think, when they're from here because it gets so you get bombarded with it. Oh, it's Grey's Anatomy. Here's the Space Needle. You're in Seattle. There's a ferry. It's because I think it's people want to show that Seattle's more than the Space Needle. As wonderful as the Space Needle is.
Did you make it specifically for this place, the Pacific Northwest, Bellingham?
It's definitely a love letter to the Northwest, for sure. I mean, it's a picture book of a lot of beautiful places that we have found. Our group of filmmakers, whether it's the actors or the producers or the writers or whatever, found in this area. And we drove there and filmed things there because we're like, this is beautiful. Like the waterfall, our actor Sage used to go there all the time. He's like, this waterfall's amazing. So we hiked a mile in with all our gear and shot in there. So it's definitely, but it's not, I don't think it'd put anybody off that's not from the area. People have seen it it played in Athens, Greece.
Oh yeah,
and people thought it was beautiful. It played in Montreal. So I mean, it definitely speaks, but it definitely is a Northwest stamp.
Yeah.
It's a Northwest movie, and that's kind of the response we got from it. Whether it was from people from the Northwest or from people outside of the Northwest, even out of the country, it was a very Northwest film.
Yeah.
There is a project that I'm developing called Expatriate, which is it's a romantic comedy / heist movie that basically kind of uses the city for a treasure hunt.
Oh.
Right,
Cool.
and so you're encountering a lot of the different quirks of Seattle.
Yeah.
And the main character, who is kind of I describe him as a virgin to the world.
Okay.
He's lived a lot of his life kind of closed off to culture and things. He is experiencing Seattle culture while also searching for this treasure, and so the encounters that he has throughout the city help him grow.
Okay.
Right, as a person, and so in that sense, the encounters that the characters have in the city of Seattle itself help them reach like a higher level of understanding about who they are, to become well-rounded characters.
Yeah.
My film Lucky Them that I just shot was set in New York originally, so I can't say it could only be shot in Seattle, but I do think it improved the film. I think everybody sort of, the consensus at the end was that it worked really well to have it in Seattle because it's about music and it's about, sort of a woman who's sort of living this sort of non-traditional lifestyle. She's 40 and she's not married, and like she's she's a music critic and she lives alone, and and it just felt very, when I read it, even though at the time it was New York based, it felt very like a very Seattle story to me. Like I recognized all the characters in it as people who I'd met sort of in Seattle, and who, the lead character, his name is Ellie, that Toni Collette plays, is so many people that I know in Seattle. There's just so many people who fit that. So it's like that movie felt really like it fit Seattle like a glove when we made the transition, and then it just, and people have said when they watch it, it's such a Seattle movie. So it's funny to me that it wasn't always a Seattle movie, but it does feel like it benefited from that.
Like that progressive lifestyle and
and just like just sort of like not necessarily conforming to something.
Not fitting a mold that is right there.
Like a societal norm or whatever, and just being free to not do that, but also having angst about it, and like it just felt like it fit.
What my brother writes most of my stuff now, but what we always wrote about, what we always talk about, is connection between people and disconnection. And I think if our movies are about people who aren't quite connecting with what is happening around them, and I think that that's kind of what I think about and what I write about is relationships and people, and that connection or disconnection that comes from relationships. And so with the Northwest is shooting the Northwest, there's so much beauty in the backdrop, especially in colors, that they're talking about something about their brother while they're throwing rocks. And that backdrop is allowing you to put some sort of meaning behind that moment that wouldn't be there if you shot it against a brick wall. It wouldn't be there if you shot it in New York. It's just something about the open hills behind them that says something about the area they're in and how kind of open the story is and how they're opening up. And there's a lot of possibilities with the backdrops.
To be honest with you, I think that most films can be adapted to take place anywhere if you really need them to. That's part of the flexibility of financing. If your investor wants you to shoot in Detroit, then you got to move your Seattle movie to Detroit. And so and so my writing, for the most part, tends to kind of use the city more as a cool backdrop, rather than influencing the narrative.
I mean, in the case of the Off Hours and Eden too, the setting's a big part of the story, but in both cases, like, it's not an actual place that exists that we're shooting in that's sort of corresponds to like what it's supposed to be on screen, so it's like in the Off Hours, it's a small town mentality, and that is something that I grew up with. And like, I lived in Moscow, Idaho for 8 years of my life, college and high school and college, and so it's like it's not a big town, and I definitely knew that sort of like what the kind of feelings people have about feeling stuck in those kind of places. And so I felt like I could bring that to it, even though we weren't actually shooting in a small town. There's been a lot of independent films made about small town life. I think that's like a genre in itself. And I've seen a lot of them, and I feel like they capture different things. I just really wanted to sort of get at some of the sort of psychological effects of these things, and like what it does to your sense of, like, Off Hours is all about like what that kind of does to your sense of hope and like your passion for your own life and your future, and so there was certain themes about it that I was interested in that I felt like I sort of had a unique vantage point on that I wanted to sort of share. So I don't know if it was necessarily like I want to do it this way because nobody else has said this before. There's so many movies out there. I'm sure other people have said it too, but I just felt like I had something specific that I was trying to get across, so I did it.
But really, I also I'm a really big fan of philosophy, and I think that if you can communicate philosophy in subtle ways through film that you might not even see on a first viewing, but maybe on a second or third viewing, you can get some deeper layers. And so what I'm hoping to do, if I do it right, is that, I'll make a movie that on one level is, very entertaining, hopefully, but then on another level, you might actually be able to walk away with some really deep insights about these characters and their journeys and the world that they inhabit. And so injecting a little bit of philosophy, I think, really helps make a film just a bit smarter.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard horror stories of people who are sort of, they don't know anyone on their film that they're working on. There's like animosity or there's like, you know, I love like the community that's built up here, and it's really been amazing for me to be able to just keep making films within the same community and sort of seeing everybody rise together.
Yeah.
So that's like the main reason, I think. It's just the people, but also just the community as a whole.
Thankfully, the incentive in Seattle has started to pick up a little steam, and so, which was a long, hard road, and they still have work to do, but it's starting to finally take the industry at large seriously. Seattle used to have, like many of the filmmakers make their films, a more of a closed view. And not making the city as accessible to outside productions. And I think finally they're starting to understand how valuable, you know, attracting Hollywood films and even independent films from other areas to this place could be, not only for the artistic growth of Seattle, but also the economy of Seattle.
Yeah.
You know, whenever a movie shoots here, you know, businesses make money, the economy goes up, and so it's really in Seattle's best interest to become like Vancouver was. You know.
Yeah. What's been your relationship to Washington Filmworks, and like how have they helped you fund your films, and do you rely on them a lot or more on private investors?
Well, they're just like, I mean, they provide sort of quote unquote funding assistance, but it's really sort of based on what you spend in Washington, you get a certain amount of cash back. That's kind of, and you know, it has to be spent within, you know, on residents or in the state. So they're never like the primary source of money for a movie. You have to raise all your money and then you get some of it back and can use it for other things. But I mean, having a film incentive brought so much work here, and I was able to work as an assistant director for 5 years. A lot of I worked on a ton of incentive projects in the very early days of the incentive. And sort of like, you know, films that probably couldn't have shot here wouldn't have come if it hadn't been, you know, for that, like World's Greatest Dad, for example, the Robin Williams movie. And so there's this, like, it built sort of the skill level of the local crew base a lot. And then when the time came to make the off hours, even though we were well below the threshold where you could get money back from the state, so we weren't an incentive project, the off hours, but we took advantage of all these people who had learned so much and had been able to stay in Washington because they were able to keep working on all these other films.
Oh, cool.
Like we shot right after this film called Late Autumn, which is a Korean, Chinese, U.S. sort of like co-production type of thing, and it was like a $5 million film that I personally worked on for like 4 months. And several people involved, the off hours, Lacey Levitt, and we had all just sort of gotten out of getting paid for a while on a decently sized budget, and so we were able to go in and make this small movie. Whereas if the incentive hadn't sort of drawn that movie here and it hadn't happened, like the off hours might not have happened. So it's sort of all kind of works together. So they're working hard to sort of like nurture local talent and then attract out of town talent and sort of do everything they can to sort of build an industry in this town from basically, you know, over the course of the time that I've been here, it's really grown from people sort of making small movies on their own to there being an actual like film industry in
like
Seattle.
people can make their careers
and it's
here.
still got a ways to go before it's not like LA or anything, but like it's definitely, you know, it can support several features at once, and you know, we make lots of good movies here.
Amy Lillard from Washington Filmworks came up and spoke to the group, and you were there as well. And it was funny because I've always known about them. I've met her a couple times. I've met people from their office. They're all great. I love what they do. But I've been too busy making commercials to pursue my personal stuff through them. But that is actually the next step. The next step actually in my career outside of commercial work is getting my film that I'm working on now that we have a trailer to and going through Washington Filmworks to get it funded.
Okay.
So I'm definitely, that's basically in the next probably 6 months, there'll be a lot of, my relationship with them will grow quite a bit, I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Depending if they like the project that I'm doing,
Okay.
obviously.
But Handcrank has never used them for
Our budgets are
for
too
any
small.
resources?
Our
Okay.
budgets are too small.
Okay.
Well, I mean, yeah, we touch base with them. Hey, we're looking for a location, hey, like things like that. But we haven't used them because they're about bringing money into the state.
Yeah.
And the kind of budgets that are just so far below their radar.
Okay.
Their bare minimum on budget is $150,000. We've never even come close to that.
For a commercial?
For a commercial.
Yeah.
We've had clients spend that much on us in a year, but that's like 10 different videos.
Oh, okay.
So our work isn't big enough.
Okay.
And our clients don't have that kind of money.
Okay.
So
What's your favorite part about shooting films in Seattle?
My favorite part about shooting films in Seattle is I would say the crew.
Let's see. I mean, I feel like I might be repeating myself here, but I mean, my favorite thing is the crew.
when shooting in Washington in particular, there's always a challenge, and the challenge is the weather.
There is a very talented, very dedicated crew base up here. And because the city of Seattle is smaller than Los Angeles, that crew is very intimate. And so when you are making films up here, I think it's far easier to create that sense of family than you would in a city like Los Angeles or New York, where productions run rampant and they're going from job to job to job. And here, every film that gets made so far is very special.
Yeah.
And so you find that the crew here work harder, they become more dedicated to the production itself, and it just creates a better overall morale because people are wanting to see the success of the project they're involved with.
The crews that I work with, I love. I just feel like, very sort of boosted up by the people who I've worked with. I kind of, working as an AD for so many years, I got to know who I want to spend 14 hours a day with and who I don't. And and now I can kind of surround myself with all these people who have like great attitudes and who are good at what they do and who are supportive and who are interested in film as an art and not just a paycheck. And and that's that's a really good way to make a movie. That's a really good place to start when you're walking onto set. And then all the other things that can go wrong, you're probably going to go wrong and crazy stuff happens. But if you have that and you're not worried about any of that stuff, it's makes your job as a director a whole lot easier and more fun.
Anything in filmmaking is always a challenge. Every day something comes up that you have to learn and adapt to. And in Washington, it's frustrating because you want to shoot on a sunny day and it's raining. But there's a side of that where your creativity, where your instincts and your taste kind of react. When it's raining and you want to shoot something that's beautiful and you only have 2 hours to shoot, some really crazy things happen. And your team comes together and you say, sometimes you're just fucked and you're like, we're calling it. But sometimes you're like, what if we do this? And then all of a sudden you have something that's better than what you've written. And that's what I love about, I love the challenge of being in this. The weather's always changing, the colors are changing. And there's also a challenge with people not knowing much about the film industry in the area. So there's freedom to that, but there's also difficulties to it. So I guess the thing I love about the Northwest is the challenge.
All right, well, that's it. So
Awesome. Well,
Nicholas, Gyeney, thank you very much for the interview.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
I hope great success for Matt's Chance.
Thank you.
December 25th.
December 25th.
Cool. And future project coming up?
2 projects, actually.
Okay.
I am working on a horror thriller called The Red Vision that I'm writing right now and hope to be shooting in the spring. And then immediately following that, I'm going to be directing a movie called The Old Fellows, which is a dramatic comedy from the producer of Silver Linings Playbook.
Oh, wow.
Which is a pretty cool career boost for me.
Yeah,
it's a step in that direction that I was telling you.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm very excited about both of those, and so I'll have a really busy 2014.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Megan Griffiths, thank you so much for letting me interview you, and any future projects coming up, or when's your next movie coming out?
Lucky Them's coming out on May 30th. That's its release date of 2014. So got some time for that one. As for next projects, that's all still sort of like trying to nail that down. So,
Cool.
So hopefully something soon. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Caleb Young. Thank you so much for the interview. But before we leave, any future projects to talk about, or anything to look out for?
We are working on a film called The Ghost Woods, and it's kind of an E.T. inspired meets kind of Twin Peaks in a way. And it's about a boy in a small town who comes back from the Ghost Woods, and the town kind of ostracizes him.
Okay.
And so he kind of starts to overcome it and starts to look behind the mystery of the Ghost Woods and why boys are being taken every year, and the town starts to unravel around it. To release of it would probably be safely 2 years, I would say.
Oh, cool.